Hello and welcome to This Week in Barbados. I'm Lisa Broom, and for the next 30 minutes, I'll bring you up to date on the highlights of the week. We have for you news, sports, entertainment, and of course, Bajan lifestyle.
The time has come to fully leave our colonial past behind. Barbadians want a Barbadian head of state. This is the ultimate statement of confidence in who we are and what we are capable of achieving.
My government declared to the world last year, on the 15th of September, in what anachronistically, hopefully, will be the last throne speech ever presented to a parliament of this nation, that we were ready to close the circle of independence.
With those declarations, Barbados began its journey on the road to attain Republican status. Two political scientists gave their thoughts on the move.
So I would say our journey towards a state in which it is acknowledged that sovereignty and power resides in the people. Our journey to that state was an incremental one.
People that are pro-republic, a lot of them would be saying that it is about time that we got there. Across the Caribbean, I don't think there's much resistance at the level of political leadership to go into a republic, but it's a difficulty in making the cultural step. And people tend not to be too eager about making that step unless it's a thrust.
Well, over the years, Barbados's relationship with England has been more than just mother country and colony. So much so that it earned us the title Little England. Let's take a look back at that bond through the lens of visits by the royals to the island.
Through the years, many royals have visited the island on tours of the West Indies and the wider former British Empire, including Her Majesty the Queen. CBC chronicles some key royal visits from the past. Heir to the British throne, Prince Edward was sent on one of many world tours to represent his father, King George V. In 1920, he visited Barbados and was feted with the usual Barbadian splendor. Imagery from the British newspaper archive shows he was hosted at a garden party at Government House. He left Barbados shortly thereafter and sailed to New Zealand to continue his tour. Royal Princess Margaret's love for a small, private island governed by modern-day St. Vincent and the Grenadines is well documented. This shouldn't overstate her trip to the West Indies in the 1950s. The princess visited Trinidad, Antigua, Jamaica, and the Bahamas, as well as Barbados. A noted cricketing fan, she made sure to greet the players before a riveting match ensued at the historic Kensington Oval Cricket Grounds between British Guyana and the West Indies. The princess also journeyed to the northern town of Speightstown, where she met and spoke with new mothers and healthcare workers. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II embarked on a royal tour of the Caribbean in 1966, where she visited Barbados twice. Accompanied by her husband Prince Philip, the royal couple engaged in many activities on the island, including short discussions with students at the University of the West Indies, the usual inspection of the guard, and a visit to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital, which was also opened by Prince Philip 2 years earlier during a trip to Barbados. At the time, Barbados had no national parks, and the Queen was invited to open our first, the Farley Hill National Park. The Queen then proceeded to cut the ribbon to open the East Coast Road Highway to a cheering crowd. In the year of her 25th anniversary of ascending to the throne, the Queen took a world tour of select destinations and returned to Barbados in October of 1977. Her Majesty inspected the guard, spoke with Barbadians, and engaged in many other events, including a tour of the Barbados Community College campus.
The government in Barbados sought to establish the framework for the further training and preparation of the youth of Barbados.
After meeting with Prime Minister Tom Adams, the Queen journeyed through an adoring crowd through the capital en route to the Parliament of Barbados. On the final day of the visit, the royal couple bid the island farewell after witnessing a farewell parade and then boarding the iconic Concorde airline. Having one of the oldest parliaments in the world, Her Majesty thought it a significant event to celebrate the 350th anniversary of the establishment of the Barbados Parliament in 1989. The Queen also participated in a ceremony to officiate a new school building at the Queen's College campus. Finally, the historic journey featured an official visit to the Barbados Parliament, where speeches were made by both local parliamentarians and the Queen herself. Many visits have been made since the Queen's last, including by Prince Harry, Prince William, and Prince Charles. Prince Charles will mark the final royal visit representing the Queen as Barbados's head of state.
And this week in Barbados continues in just a moment. Barbados is in the midst of another wave of the COVID-19 pandemic due to the presence of the Delta variant, and October was particularly bad. Let's take a look.
No two ways about it, October truly was a scary month and the most devastating for Barbados since our first case back in March 2020. So the question is, just how bad was it? Listen to this. In the 31 days of October 2021, Barbados recorded 9,414 positive COVID-19 cases for an average of 303 cases per day for the month. Now, what's really telling about that number is that between March 2020 and October 1st, 2021, Barbados recorded 8,609 cases. Now that means that October alone accounted for more cases than the last 18 months leading up to it put together. And in doing so, we smashed the highest one-day total on 6 different occasions. October 11th saw 342 new cases. That record was then broken 4 days later with 346 cases on the 15th. Then 3 days later after that, the Best of Santos Public Health Lab revealed a new record of 382 cases from the tests conducted on the 18th. That wasn't the end to those toppling numbers, though. 392 new cases were recorded on the 20th. Then, on the very next day, we broke that 400 ceiling for the first time, recording 427 cases on the 21st. And then on the 25th, we had our last record-breaking day for the month, and that saw 445 new cases. Lisa, now something that we must note is that October also put to bed the notion of COVID-19 being a problem only for the elderly, as 2,000, as you can see right there, that number, 2,059 people under the age of 18 contracted the virus in the month. That's 21.87% of the total number of cases for October. And as I've been saying, it was the deadliest month for Barbados, recording 78 deaths in the month. Get this, that's the exact same number of deaths were recorded between our first death on April 5th, 2020 and September 30th, 2021. That's how serious it was. Now, in terms of vaccines, October saw 12,985 people getting their first dose of a COVID-19 vaccine, and the percentage of the population totally vaccinated moved from 39.1% right there to 46.8%. So this was a breakdown just to show how rough the month of October was on Barbados regarding the COVID-19 virus.
That paints a stark picture of the COVID-19 situation in Barbados. But let's drill down a little bit, because these thousands of cases are people who make up the Barbadian workforce. Here's Trisha Tanis, president of the Barbados Private Sector Association.
Before our eyes, we're seeing you're coming to work, you're getting a call that says so-and-so has been confirmed positive. And we now need to go and contact trace around that individual. So 3 or 4 on average persons, in addition to the primary case, disappear from the work environment. Depending on how big that context is to the unit, the division, the business closes, not because they are rushing to close, but because they have to, for maybe a 7-week period, a 7-day period, or maybe a 14-day period. And therefore, there's no reliability of your business operation, or very little. There is such disruption, it is untenable. But let me highlight, and I go back to the first comment that I made when you asked the question, because no one is actually considering the impact on the employee themselves. So you can imagine that you're coming to work, and then all of a sudden your supervisor comes and they tell you, grab your bags, you have to head to the nearest polyclinic, because X person or Y person within your location, is positive. And because, and depending on if you're primary or secondary, you have to go, and not just go, you have to take one test, you have to then retest in 5 days. Test results coming back and so on, that's a week or so you're out of the business. And therefore, it is not just disruptive for businesses, it is also disruptive for employees, particularly employees on the front line, which we are observing, unfortunately, are still mainly, or the majority of which are still unvaccinated. All right. And therefore, the likelihood of spread within the frontline areas and spaces of the business communities across Barbados is extremely vulnerable right now. And it's against that background that the BPSA, and they made no bones about it, and 2-3 months ago, we're asking for a vaccine mandate. And if not a national mandate, by the very least, a frontline mandate. And not just in the private sector either. We think that all frontline employees across the nation are at risk, and therefore we need to look at essentially either a vaccination mandate with 2 exclusions, and we wholeheartedly support persons' rights not to be vaccinated, and particularly those that have genuine medical conditions and general social objectionable or conscionable issues as far as their religious basis is concerned, and that is fine. But having done so, then we do need to still to work to protect the work environment from persons that science is telling us are 10 times more likely to spread the current variant, Delta, in the work environment.
I also sat down via Zoom with Sheena Mears-Granville of the Barbados Employers Confederation. The executive director says there's been a 2-pronged impact.
Because of the surge, we have our schools closed. So we have parents who are performing double duty. And it's very difficult for parents to manage their children and school, because of course they want their children to continue with the education in as much as possible during this time, while still performing duties during the same hours. So that also becomes difficult for the remaining workforce. So not only are you pulling extra slack from persons who are out, it's not their fault, but if they're sick, but you're picking up that extra. Plus, there are those persons who have to manage homeschooling during this period. So it's been especially rough on workers and businesses trying to manage through this surge.
Have the employers been able to quantify how much of an impact financially this situation has had?
No, I am not able to give statistics, But I do know that there are some employers who have tracked the cost implications arising from COVID. So we talk about workers being away from work and the reduction in productivity, but there are also increased expenses. So you have to hire temporary labor where feasible, but then the additional cost of safety measures, the provision of PPE to employees, and then if persons are remote working, there's some employers who might have made provisions to assist workers as they transition to remote work. And so there are those costs that employers have had to bear during this crisis. So unfortunately, I don't have a dollar figure for you. It's something that we're going to look to work on compiling, but I do know that there are some employers who've been able to track that information. So, and it's been quite costly. That's what they're reporting to us.
And with COVID cases rising daily, many offices are closed for sanitization.
The public has been seeing and hearing notices of closures at government offices, day nurseries, supermarkets, and the list goes on for sanitization due to COVID-positive cases. Some people may ask if they really need to close if it's just 1 or 2 cases. But the Ministry of Health has a protocol in place since October this year, guiding exactly what and how it needs to be done. The time frame is stated. Offices, especially in air-conditioned environments, undergo a rapid cleaning. We followed a team as they cleaned an office, and there was special equipment and supplies being used.
We have a machine that we call a fogger. We usually mix the chemical to specifications, and we put it in the fogger, and we basically mist the area. When I say mist the area, it's operated by electricity. So you basically spray the entire area where allowing the chemical to make contact with the surfaces, giving it a time to just settle. And then we use microfiber cloth using the same chemical to wipe the touch surfaces. If it's an environment like an office, you do the desks, you do the chairs, contact surfaces like counters, door handles.
As we outlined before, the face of COVID-19 is very real and scary for the most vulnerable. Today, we hear from Jenny, not her real name as her identity has been concealed, but she spoke with Shamko Pillay of the Barbados Government Information Service about her experience.
According to the World Health Organization, people living with HIV are at an increased risk of getting severely sick with COVID and possibly dying if they are immunocompromised. Yet, meet a Barbadian woman living with HIV who contracted COVID-19 and lives to tell her tale, as well as her daily struggles to protect herself from reinfection. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
I am 43 years old. I'm asthmatic. I had heart surgery. I had a stroke. Yes, I had a surgery already. And also, I'm living with HIV.
When you first heard about this illness called COVID-19 back in 2020 when it came to Barbados, obviously it was around the globe before, what were your initial thoughts about it?
I need to tell you now, my doctor, Dr. Wayne Clark, did not want me to be at work. And then I called back Dr. Wayne Clark, and I said, Dr. Wayne Clark, I go to the gymnasium, I'm going to get tests and make sure that I don't have COVID, and I'm going to take the vaccine. I said, Dr. Wayne Clark, I could get the vaccine with my HIV and my medical conditions. He told me yes. And when the frontline nurses was going, I didn't have no appointment. I went to 6 Rose Clinic and I get my first vaccine. And then I went back and I got my second vaccine.
So this is months since you've been vaccinated, but late August, September, you tested positive for COVID-19.
Yes, please.
Tell me about that.
I have a son. He is 23 years old. Don't listen to me. On the block smoking his weed and everything, wrong friends. And how do I know the Barbados Defense Force? he was on the phone and he started getting on a certain way, telling people when they can't come for me and get on very rude to the people. So he took away the phone and I asked who was speaking on the phone. So they tell me them from the Barbados Defense Force and come here for my son because that he got to go and get tests. So I told them okay they could come. So when they came for him now, the next day he called me and told me he positive. And the COVID-19 unit people call me and tell me that I have to go to the gymnasium to get tested because he tests positive. When I went and I find out that I had COVID, I was in shock.
So given your underlying conditions, could you describe the severity of the illness you experienced when you were COVID-19 positive?
I had a bad cold, my nose was running, and also my asthma I was wheezing as well.
You were in isolation at Harrison Point. Now, primary isolation is for those people who are completely critical, who are really battling for their life. But that didn't appear to be the case with you. Where exactly in those isolation categories you stayed?
I stayed in secondary isolation, please.
Okay, and where was your son?
My son was in second isolation as well.
Was he experiencing symptoms?
Yes, please. He had a bad cold, and also he's an asthmatic too.
So what are some of the things you do now differently to protect yourself, having gone through that experience at Harrison Point?
I just go wear a mask inside and outside. Every time I go in, I sanitize my hand at the door. I take off my mask, wash my hands, everything, and put on a new mask. If I go in the kitchen, I have on a mask. Whatever I do in the house, I have to wear a mask.
It's time for another break, but we'll be back with more This Week in Barbados in just a moment. Well, after being sidelined for months due to COVID-19 regulations, the ladies of the Barbados netball team are back on the court, preparing for an away test series against Scotland and a one-off match against the Isle of Man.
The Bajan Gems are back on court training as they gear up for the upcoming test series with hosts Scotland and Isle of Man. In the hopes of preserving their qualification for next year's Commonwealth Games, the series is an important one, and the Gems will be looking to maintain their winning history over the 8th-ranked Scotland and 23rd-ranked Isle of Man. President of the Barbados Netball Association, Nisha Craigbell, says it's good to be back in international action.
The top 12 countries in the world traditionally travel and compete at the Commonwealth Games, but currently Zimbabwe, who are ranked 12, are not a Commonwealth country, so automatically the next team up is Barbados. Ironically, after Barbados, Cook Islands are ranked 14th, just 2 ranking points behind Barbados. So it is very important for us to play now to ensure that when the cutoff date comes on January 31st, that Barbados is in a position to compete at Commonwealth Games. As you may know, we have attended every Commonwealth Games since 1998, and we are going to ensure that this Commonwealth Games next year in July, Birmingham, Barbados will also be competing.
With a good mix of youth and experience, the team will be led by the island's most decorated netballer, Latonia Blackman, and head coach Margaret Cutting is pleased with how preparation has been going.
So far, the team have been doing very good. We have some senior players here, Shauna Bruce, and Latoya Blackman. They're the senior players in the team, along with Brianna Holder, Shanika Thomas, Shanika Wharton. We also have some new faces in the team, and there's some younger players that the senior players will take over and help them through our tour. Not playing since 2019 and given a chance to play now in 2021, I am really happy to see that our national program is back up and running.
As expected, the team will have to undergo COVID testing and a 2-day quarantine period prior to leaving the island on November 24th. On arrival in Scotland, they'll have a 1-day quarantine period and further testing before competition starts on December 2nd. Games will be played at Glasgow's Emirates Arena.
And we wish the girls all the luck in the world. It was certainly a pleasure bringing you the news and interviews of Barbadians who made the headlines. I'll be back very soon with another week in Barbados. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Lisa Broom.